let's start, let's start with a banger. All right, let's start with Whatifalthist, and this video that I think it's gonna be, Whatifalthist. I love his content. I think he's one of my favorite YouTubers out there, and you guys recommended him to me, and I really enjoy consuming his content. So let's see what he thinks about the borders of the 22nd century. Kind of a strange concept to talk about, but let's look at his thumbnail for a second. He has an independent Cape region of South Africa. I think that would make some sense. I don't know why he has southern Brazil as independent. I think this might be racially motivated, and I think some of these things might be racially motivated, which, I'm always conflicted with stuff like that. We got Colombia in blue, Mexico in blue, Venezuela in blue, which I'm guessing this is sort of the West, or the, NATO, the European Union, as you would call it. And really, really interesting. We've got Cuba in blue as well. Europe, we got an independent Scotland. We've got a joint Scandinavia. We've got a Germany that looks kind of weird, like a Germany that sort of resembled some other Germany. We've got, there's a lot of things going on here. A massive Chinese empire that just swallowed Mongolia and Siberia. We've got a united Korea. Thailand is now Siam again. There's a lot of things going on here. Let's just stop wasting time and let's go for this video. Russia gets oofed, I guess. I watched it by myself already. Whatifalthist always believes in a Turkish empire. True, that's kind of strange. Yeah, but you're kind of right. You always talk about Turkey that way.
And people since then have really wanted me to make a video explaining why I made these what appear to be pretty strange border predictions for the world in 100 years. Well, here it is.
And I'm gonna eat.
This is a video.
I hope you guys don't mind.
Through the borders of every continent to explain what I think they'll be like in the year 2120. So without ado, let's get started. A couple times I've wondered what's exactly the product that would pander to Whatifalthist fans the best. Well, I think I found it.
I wondered that too.
Analysis is a consulting firm that helps with companies, governments, philanthropists, and the like advance our collective civilization.
R.I.P. Canada.
They're aligned with Whatifalthist and the goals of helping our society through the crisis that we're about to face with all the wisdom we'll need. Like Whatifalthist, they try to look at the historical trends that result in the rise and fall of civilizations and then project them forwards into the future.
Okay, interesting. The West, we've got Latin America, Orthodox civilization, Islam.
Future. They also have an incredible brief that you can start reading for free, which covers the exact theory. Something I want to remind this audience about is that this map isn't gospel, and I'm not certain the world will turn out like this. It's often funny for me when my fans take this map and other maps I make more seriously than I do, and this map is a series of implicit assumptions that I think will be correct, but could easily
my 4 trends for the century: greater wealth, we come to terms with technology, the clash of civilizations, the internet and religion weaken the state.
Wrong. For more information on what the assumptions I'm
making,
what's
the time in Mexico?
It's
1 p.m. I think. Yeah.
As an example, I make the assumption that one group of humans won't genetically engineer themselves into superhuman status and gain world domination, or runaway climate change doesn't occur. Both of these are within the range of possibility, however. Or I've heard compelling arguments both for greater centralization and greater decentralization in the future, and I'm frankly not sure what side will win, and so I created a midway scenario here. As I always say, I'm betting against God here, and there are infinite ways to be wrong with predictions and only a handful to be right. With that out of the way, let's get started. Part 1. North America. Canada is the most confusing and complicated part of this map. In a previous rendition of this script, just
R.I.P. Canada, my guy. What?
Took a tremendous...
I mean, an independent Quebec, okay, makes sense. I could see that. Independent Ontario and British Columbia. And then you got the Northern Territories and like Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Why? I don't know. Well, let's learn.
But luckily enough, since then, I've made a video about the potential future of Canada, Click the link to that video for more details. The long and short of it, however, is that Canada is a loose confederacy of various provinces with very different self-interests, and these provinces build various coalitions and arrangements in order to keep Canada a unified country. However, I think that due to a combination of a crisis in Canada's identity and very different demographic trends with aging between the western and eastern provinces of Canada means that the ideologically more conservative and aligned with the U.S. western prairie provinces will want to join America at the middle of the century. Looking at cycles across American history, the U.S. will likely be going through a golden age at the middle of the century, meaning this will look very attractive, while at the same time, eastern Canada would be going through horrific aging, thus depressing its economy. Once the prairie provinces go, the tapestry of alliances that holds Canada together starts to fray. Quebec, the French-speaking province that continually nearly secedes, leaves Canada if anything remotely stressful happens. Likewise, if these two regions leave, it means British Columbia...
I don't know, man. I mean, do Canadians, especially again from the provinces, he called them the prairie provinces, do they want to join the US? Is this like a thing they want? I've heard a lot of anti-American or like very pro-Canadian identity arguments from Canadians. So I don't know. I don't know if that would really be a thing.
Which is culturally and economically distinct from the rest of Canada and the U.S. as an independent country. The Maritimes cut off from Quebec joins the U.S., while Ontario, the proudest Canadian province, remains independent and becomes wealthy based off exploiting loopholes in the U.S. legal code due to its central geography.
Yeah.
I don't agree with the modern consensus that the U.S. is really in decline as a superpower, at least not the fall of Rome that so many pessimists believe. I think the U.S. is becoming the next Roman Empire in a real sense, and will experience several gold ages and dark times across the next century, with the current period being one. I think the problems the U.S. is facing now are comparable to the struggles of the late Roman Republic or the Russian Revolution, and is a short period of failure before the U.S. goes through another period of strength. However, this map underplays America's strength since the U.S. will almost certainly dominate the colonization of space, which isn't on this map of Earth. Meanwhile, when looking at Central America and the Caribbean, we're largely looking at how things are now. Realistically, if you look at a map of the world based off...
Come on, baby. Mexico annexing Guatemala. Let's do it.
Countries that the U.S. has as allies, it looks very different than a worldview based just off sovereign official borders. Basically, every country in this area is a U.S. satellite or ally.
Yeah.
However, I think this process will be expedited and helped by the assimilation of Hispanic Americans, which is already occurring very quickly. Imagine how much it would help American-Latin relations in a country where many prosperous American states are plurality Hispanic, and Hispanics have gained significant political influence, maybe even with a Hispanic president. What's often normal is that former communist countries become very capitalist upon getting out from the boot of their normally hated communist ruling parties and become capitalist since they know how bad communism is. I see this process happening in Cuba. I think Cuba will become the wealthiest country in Latin America, also due to its proximity to the U.S.
Probably.
And the wealthy and influential
Probably. I really think this is the case.
Florida,
or this will be the case.
Probably flood money into Cuba to modernize it. Part 2, South America. I don't see a lot of border changes in South America. As I said before in a previous video, South America has actually been hurt in some ways by its borders making too much sense, in that in almost all cases, South American countries are built around fertile heartlands surrounded by impassable jungles, deserts, or mountains on the fringes. This is a blessing in making this unusually peaceful continent, but also means there's never competition or pressure to really improve between countries. I also don't see Latin America
Thomas.
Really
How are you doing?
A big industrial push outside the areas bordering the U.S., since this area really hasn't...
Whoa. I know the amount of other videos I've made that I referenced in this video is insane, but this is my video explaining why Latin America will remain poor. What the fuck?
Big industrial push outside the areas bordering the U.S.
Well, we border the U.S.,
really
so I guess that's good.
Moved forward economically as compared to the rest of the world in 300 years. The U.S. allies here are the ones the U.S. largely has now. I'm adding Venezuela for the exact reason I see Cuba becoming an American ally. The future of Venezuela as a society is largely dictated by whether they can get their act together before or after we switch away from a predominantly oil economy, if we do. The only border shift I could see is that the wealthy, white, and culturally distinct southern Brazil splits off from the rest of the Brazil in the crisis of the third world that I anticipate in the next few decades, in which central Brazilian power will become autocratic and weak. I would see them align themselves with the white southern cone of U.S. allies that exists in the region like Uruguay, Argentina, or Chile, of what Europe's future will be, that I'll cover in more detail in some future video. However, I think the U.S. is going through a crisis of identity that will result in the U.S. pulling back from Europe, which the U.S. will ostensibly have little reason to protect. However, I don't think either party realizes how necessary the Americans are to the functioning of the modern European order. At the same time, Europe will be experiencing a demographic and aging crisis that will rip their societies apart. I think this crisis will humble Europe, which will now have to painfully realize it is no longer the center of the world that it was 100 years ago.
And we just saw some of this. For example, I was reading the news about Germany and how they are rebuilding their military. So
the Americans will then return to Europe as America's population remains stable while Europe's is rapidly collapsing. The Europeans, who have seen many horrors between collapsing economies, civil wars, external wars, and the like, will then acquiesce to greater American influence, who will gradually colonize Europe in a process that I don't think either will consciously view as colonization, as various European countries are gradually weakened into forming a pan-European confederacy under American guidance.
All right.
The explanation for this is too long, and so I made it a text wall, but I think the comparison to the Greeks and Romans is very apt, in which the Romans tried to liberate the Greeks and the Macedonians, and then the Romans, who greatly respected the Greeks, tried various self-governance schemes for the region, only to realize that Greek civilization was in active decline, and as the Greeks continually failed, the Romans gradually took over the area. For more details, I would check out the book The Coming Caesars by Amaury de Riencourt, which looks at
The Coming Caesars. Sounds like a pretty interesting book.
Parallels between the Greeks and the Romans and modern Europeans and Americans in a very compelling way. As Europe becomes less a place of power and more a museum of declining nations, borders will change to make sense to more geographically and ethnically based off some war in the 18th century. Ethnically split nations like Belgium, Austria, and Switzerland will likely split or become part of their co-ethnic nations. Likewise, the UK likely divide with Scotland splitting off, partially driven by the decline of Britain from great power, and as religion becomes less of a sticking point, Ireland will unify. As transportation has gotten a lot faster since the Industrial Revolution, countries like Slovakia, the Baltics, and Scandinavia will form confederacies with their co-ethnics to gain more leverage and power in a world of bigger countries. As Europe becomes weaker and more inside the American sphere of influence, I think the Americans will buy Greenland off the Danes. Greenland is central to missile warfare, and as the world warms, will probably become the center of the...
I don't know about this. I mean, America already had an offer for Greenland back when Donald Trump was president. I think they didn't sold it. So unless the US makes like a very large offer for Greenland, I don't think Denmark is gonna, agree to sell Greenland, right? For the same reason America wants it, right? Denmark, wants that very valuable island of Greenland. So I don't think they will sell it easily. It could happen. America has done a lot of things, but I just don't see it. Especially now, which I'm guessing he's gonna talk about northern trade routes of the Arctic, which again, that's very valuable.
The Arctic trade routes, thus making it extremely strategically important for the U.S. Due to the collapse of belief in the shared Russian mission as a nation alongside their massive...
Germany just put 100 billion euros to their military. That's a lot of money. Wow.
Collapse. I don't think Russia or the Balkans will survive. For a bunch of reasons, I'm bullish on Turkey as a future superpower, and with the Balkans experiencing the fastest population collapses of anywhere in the world, often losing half their population over the next few decades, I see the populous Muslim world just moving settlers into the Balkans and Crimea, turning them into cultural extensions of the Middle East. I also see similar trends in the Christian Caucasus nations like Armenia and Georgia, which are under very similar demographic and cultural circumstances. The US doesn't have a lot of cultural or strategic interests in the Balkans, and would allow this to happen when distracted elsewhere. But we would see a frontier develop between Christian and Muslim worlds at the edge of the Hungarian plain around modern Belgrade, which is the natural geographic choke point. With the collapse of Russia, I see two powers gaining more influence in the void that Russia leaves in Eastern Europe, the Poles and the Turks. I see the Poles expanding east, seizing Belarus and western Ukraine, which will become a buffer state between Turkish, Russian, and Western influence. I see the Turks gaining dominance over the Black Sea, as they have for most of the modern period, using Crimea as a detached peninsula with a large Muslim minority as an airbase to control the region from. I see them allying with...
Europeans need to have more kids to stop our demographic decline. There are less babies and more older people incoming. And that's going to be pretty bad for the people, for the young people, because your taxes at the end of the day are going to have to pay for all the retirement, all the pensions of the older generation. So yeah, I agree. I would hope that European people had more babies. I understand it's a very complicated subject. You know, you can't just simply tell people to have babies. And I don't know how really we would solve that problem. But I hope you guys do. I don't want to see a decline in Europe. Yeah, Germany will have the third highest military spending in the world, probably. What do you guys think about that? You know, that's kind of an interesting thought. You know, when was the last time Germany had that big of an army? Not to say that they're going to do something like that, obviously, but it's just how times truly are changing now. Japan, I also heard they are building up their military again. Germany now, with that massive budget increase, becoming the third after China and the US, I'm guessing, ahead of Russia. So that's pretty big news. I don't know why it wasn't bigger news, at least where I live. But that's huge. That's pretty significant at the very least.
With Russia's Muslim minority populations, that they often have a good amount of cultural connection with, like the Chechens and Tatars, who have the highest birth rates of anyone in Russia, and will only get...
Some European countries are, I guess, replacing birth rates with immigrants. True, and I guess it works. I guess it's complicated in other ways. You know, assimilating immigrants is not easy. It's very politically expensive, right? How many people threw shit at people like Angela Merkel for accepting all those immigrants, right? Bringing immigrants is politically expensive because you become unpopular, because there's a lot of people that just don't like immigrants. So it's complicated because of that. Then you got the cultural, religious barrier that, you know, it exists. And the economic situation, right? You know, adjusting a third world, and I hate to use this analogy because this is like Cold War analogy, you know, the first world and the third world. But I guess assimilating a population that comes from a developing nation is not as easy as you might think. And so, yeah, it's complicated, but that would work. I mean, France is not doing bad. Germany's doing great right now. So I think maybe I could be wrong on that.
More populous over time as Russia's, especially Orthodox Christian population, collapses.
I think I saw an article saying Hungary is paying couples for every kid they have.
Grassland of Russia,
shit.
As a
you know, guys, let's move to Hungary,
depending on how much
dude.
the mission of a unified Russia has failed at this point, Chernosem might continually attempt to join up with the fragment of what used to be Russia. Also, spoilers for a future video, I think there's a decent chance that a new civilization develops in this area. Part 4, Africa. There are two
this is going to be
interesting to understand to figure out the Africa you see on this map. The first is that I think the Muslim world will industrialize and become wealthy. This is because that region of the world has commonly been wealthy across history, as well as it's the only major one of the 4 Eurasian civilizations that hasn't industrialized. Even so, we've already seen a precedent of industrialization in Turkey and Iran.
Yes, because Russia doesn't have a much large economy.
However, you see no such similar trend for Black Africa, which has none of the preconditions for industrialization. Thus, when you see this mega Morocco, you're looking at what happens when an industrialized Muslim country sees the opportunity to conquer a technologically inferior region. This is keeping with the Moroccan tradition of invading West Africa. It's happened a couple times.
I know his channel is about alternate history, all right? I know. But is Morocco gonna invade some of its southern neighbors? I mean, like Mali, Mauritania. I just don't. I don't know. I don't know much about Moroccan modern politics, but I just don't think they're gonna do that. Well, 22nd century, you know.
It's pretty easy to build highways across the Sahara for communication, with the Moroccans creating a second empire across the Sahara and the Sahel.
I could be wrong.
Likewise, I see a similar trend with Turkish influence taking place in Sudan and Northeast Africa. The second dominant trend is that the state doesn't have a strong record in this region of the world and was largely created by Europeans for their own colonial purposes without dealing with local conditions. At the same time, most African nations haven't been able to construct strong national identities, with their governments often being rackets for one ethnic group to extract payments from the others. I call the era since World War II the UN Bretton Woods era, given that it's been an alliance of American power with UN politics to basically keep nation-states operating even when they have no coherent reason to. This system used to make more sense. Most of the third world countries were inhabited by underpopulated peasant communities, but as the third world became more urbanized, literate, populated, and wealthy, political organizations will have to change to represent their identities more. After Asia, Africa is the top region in the world where I expect atrocities and mass death this century, since it's largely the only region that's having ludicrous population growth, which is the big driver for atrocities. Projections show Africa will have 3 to 4 times China's population, or past 4 billion, by the end of the century.
There's going to be 4 billion people in Africa. That's massive growth. And I, of course, worry about that, but more on the resources kind of side, you know? Like, are we going to be able to feed that many humans? Yeah, much better than someone like Japan. True. Japan is just not doing well with that.
Makes no sense.
What does the Japanese population... Where's the video? Oh, there we go.
And so there really has to be a big crisis. I see the old African order collapsing and being replaced by a lot of chaos. I see a laboratory
South Korea
of
has a
various
pretty low
warlords,
birth
theocracies, and crypto
True.
states.
A lot of East
I think
Asia.
this degree of competition will actually be amazing for the continent and its future history, since it will create massive pressures towards improvement in creating African civilizations.
The U.S. might be able to feed Africa. We grow 3 times more food than what our population needs. Really? That's super cool, man. That could be a new market for American products, Africa.
Sort of like how modern Western civilization
Charlemagne.
The chaos that came after the fall of Rome. I mean, the main geographic problems that kept Africa
True.
in poverty until recently are largely gone, so if Africa can formulate a way to wealth, they can achieve it. However, I think there are a couple exceptions to this rule, the first of which is ethnically coherent or resource-bearing territories on the coast that I'm pretty sure would survive.
The Yoruba in
coherent
Nigeria.
states. One is the Igbo in Nigeria, who could export their oil or the oil-bearing mouth of the Congo River, which would become a hub of trade. Finally, Cape Town, which has always been a city-state that's belonged to every continent, I see splitting off as an American ally. Similarly, whenever you get chaotic data sets, you always have a couple outliers. Or in other words, when you get a lot of little crazy states, you'll end up with a couple large empires run by geniuses that dominate their regions, just off statistical chance. At the same time, sub-Saharan Africa is one of the few places that doesn't have a long history of preformed civilization and cultural boundaries, meaning that this region has the potential for great Charlemagnes, Harun al-Rashids, or George Washingtons who could form whole new civilizations. Although, in all fairness, this state could develop anywhere in Africa, I'm putting a bet on East Africa, which has largely seen the best leadership in Africa so far, some of the best nation building, and also the formations of what could be the East African Union, or a federation of Kenya, Tanzania, South Sudan, Rwanda, and Burundi.
I mean, some of these countries have very dynamic economies. So, you know, Kenya, Tanzania, some of the places that have the most economic growth are on this side of Africa. So I wouldn't be surprised if they become one of the most developed nations in Africa if they decide to join, which I would think it'd be a smart choice, you know, a smart decision, at least for them. A really good leadership.
Plan on forming a unified country. I honestly don't have really high hopes for this working, but of any one place in Africa, I have the highest hopes of this region.
I agree.
Empire. As the rest of Africa might spiral into war, neighboring areas would seek protection under the East African Union, with a notable example being the resource-rich southeastern province of Katanga in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that would sell its resources east through the Indian Ocean, rather than west through Kinshasa as it does now. The final spot is Ethiopia, which I think would be the main competitor to form an African empire alongside the East African Union.
Djibouti, Eritrea.
Ethiopia is the only main country in sub-Saharan Africa to industrialize,
Somalia,
and also is the main one that has a large history of a strong state before European colonization.
True. I have a friend from Ethiopia, and you know he's always very proud about its country's history and how they weren't colonized by Europeans. I mean, I guess they were sort of annexed by Italy, but they never surrendered. So that's cool. So yeah, Ethiopia. I have good hopes for Ethiopia.
For a future African empire. Part 5. Asia.
Okay,
the
this
main
is gonna
trend that I
be
see born out in
interesting.
Asia over this next century is closing the technological gap that Western civilization has had over the last 500 years. In a lot of ways, this is pulling us back into the Middle Ages, in which countries that have had long-standing geopolitical, demographic, or strategic advantages since the time of Marco Polo will again gain dominance over their civilizations. Starting in the West, I've already talked about the Turks a bit in their other continents. In short, there's a reason the Turks...
He loves talking about the Turks, man. He loves talking about
the Middle East for almost all of the last 1,000 years. They have cultural, geographic, and military advantages over the dispossessed Arabs. I think as oil will probably become less important, the Middle East will revert to the large empires that have ruled it for thousands of years, with the Turks and Iranians being the obvious contenders. I think the Turks will win in a conflict against the Iranians, like they've done the last several times, due to their greater wealth, technological progress, population, and sharing Sunni identity with most of the area.
Okay, so let's see. We've got weak state in Egypt, failed states in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, surprisingly, oil-dependent Iran and the Gulf states. So I guess that's his argument to say that Turkey can build a neo-Ottoman empire, which I would disagree with that. I don't think that's the case. Plus, Lebanon seems to be doing fine. Israel, sort of doing fine. I don't know. I don't know about this one.
Turks are largely surrounded by failed states, so this is easier than you'd think. I see the Turks establishing a series of client states outside their direct sphere of influence, in places like Oman, the Hejaz, and Libya. One of the most fraught decisions I've struggled with in this map was whether Israel would survive. On one end, if the Muslim world industrializes, Israel is dead, since it's so hated by the surrounding Muslims. However, the Jews are a stubborn people that are hard to kill, and I see the Turks, who have a history of multi-ethnic...
What? Why do you say it like that, bro?
However, the Jews are a stubborn people that are hard to kill, and I see the Turks...
They are stubborn people that are hard. I mean, I know he doesn't mean bad, but it just sounded a little bit weird, especially when you consider history and the context. But I think probably Israel will survive, especially not based on its own power, but based on the fact that they are an American ally and a very strong American ally. So even if the Muslim world, and this is just my opinion, but I think even if the Muslim world industrializes and they want to destroy Israel, I don't think that's going to happen because of how much the USA really likes Israel. Bruh. A lot of Europeans in the Middle Ages and early modern era had a respect for Ethiopia because it was an ancient Christian kingdom with links to biblical stories. True, I could see that.
To have a history of
which would make a lot of sense.
Cooperating with the Jews, in effect,
Christianity in Ethiopia does have a very strong history and link.
However, another point of view is that the Israelis also might be able to create an effective Arab coalition that keeps the Turkish Empire from forming in the first place. I see the ethnic Turkish states in Central Asia becoming allies of the Turkish nation due to their cultural reasons. I redrew the borders here to fit more around actual ethnic borders in the region because, as of now, the borders of Central Asia were literally designed by Stalin to screw over any future independent countries.
Literally.
These areas will probably become wealthy and central to the world economy as Asia becomes wealthy and the old Silk Road trade centers grow up again. If the Islamic world industrializes, we will also get the second pole of the Middle East. Iran sees power. The countries to Iran's east, like Afghanistan or Pakistan, are largely artificial, unstable, and created for political reasons, and I don't see them surviving. Under those conditions, we would return to the previous situation.
We've got something interesting here. So there's no Pakistan. Instead, we got Baluchistan and Pashtunistan, sort of joining with Afghanistan, the Pashtun people. So very interesting take.
Which Persia would have a large sphere.
I could see that. Pakistan has been struggling a lot as a country.
Cultural influence
in like modern times.
Mountains, but would leave these geographically tough and unruly regions to their own practical self-governance. I think India will go through a period of painful, intense politics over the next few decades before becoming wealthier, working off the chip on their shoulder from British colonialism, and then move on to becoming the stable, isolationist civilization they've been for the last 4,000 years. I don't see Bangladesh or Pakistan as successful states, and so think that as India continues to grow and get richer, that India will suck in both into their economic and then afterwards cultural and political order. As India mellows out and asks to work with Muslim territories, will start to construct its identity around the shared Indic civilization rather than Hinduism. Burma, which is the rice bowl for this region and geographically and culturally connected to the broader Indic world, will also probably end up in the orbit and as an ally to a mature and wealthy India. The main reason I have China eat so much of Siberia and Central Asia is just sheer demographics. The whole of Siberia and Central Asia combined has a population of less than 100 million, while China has a population of 1.5 billion. The thing that's kept the Chinese from populating and settling these areas, many of which can support far more people. I mean, the Chinese side of the border is 200 million people and the Russian is 4, than they do today, is a combination of how the Chinese were militarily inferior to the native inhabitants of these areas who were nomads, and Russian power.
Some people say India will surpass China in population by 2027. I think that would make a lot of sense. You know, they're very close already. You know, they both have like 1.4 or 1.3 and 1.4 billion people. So that would make a lot of sense. Baluchistan region, people fighting for independent country. Wow. So they are already independence movements there. That's interesting.
Both of which are going to go away. I also have much of East Asia join the Chinese
orbit,
since as China industrializes, it will force these countries into inextricably close economic cooperation.
Korea?
The main thing that keeps these countries from being Chinese allies is that the Communist Party is cruel and morally corrupt. However, in a lot of ways, the Communist Chinese Party is a deviant from most of Chinese history, in which regimes have generally been pretty honorable and not too expansionist. At the same time, Japan and Korea have been Chinese allies for most of their histories, and have a switch that basically allows them to switch allegiance
not when it comes to recent history, that's for sure.
Which is how they've been able to so successfully take up Western culture. What I think will happen is that as China collapses into its warlord period, the Communist Party will become more totalitarian and cruel. Then we'll move over to the war.
What I would agree with is the decline of the Communist Party. I would agree with that. Is China gonna eat half of Siberia from Russia? Well, you have to remind yourself that Russia has nukes, okay? China also has nukes, but Russia has a lot more nukes. So even if China, which China is already a lot more powerful than Russia, even if China really wants and really needs Siberia, I don't think they can get it. Like, why would Russia give up Siberia to China? When they have nuclear weapons, they can say, no, I'm not going to give you this. And if you invade me, if you go to war with me, I'm just going to nuke like half your cities and like cause a lot of damage. So I think this is very far-fetched, but who knows? He made Japan Chinese allies. Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? Some Chinese nationalists want to retake the Russian Far Eastern lands because it was once part of the Qing Empire from the 1500s to the 1800s. True, I could see how people would want this. I just don't see it happening, man.
Warlord period,
especially when you consider nukes,
the Communist Party, I think we'll have a nationalist and socially conservative China, but also one that's relatively honorable, and so all the nations in the area would be willing to work with China. Finally, I see the collapse of Indonesia, which is, again, one of the most fraught decisions I've made.
Could happen.
Indonesia really doesn't make a lot of sense as a country, both geographically and culturally. But the Indonesians have done a pretty good job of constructing a national identity in the 20th century. And that's not something I covered about in my videos of countries that will collapse, but I do think it's important. I consider the survival of Indonesia a toss-up depending on whatever the leadership involved is. I have the region split here between Chinese and American proxies, with the Americans supporting Java, the most populated island close to Australia, and the Chinese supporting Borneo and Sumatra and other islands that largely view Java as their oppressor, and also they'd sell goods to the Chinese economy. Whatifalthist, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, sir, and also they'd sell...
Yeah, and it's also very interesting how you can see even the borders of Asia, as in the islands closer to Australia and Oceania in general are more American or Western allies, and the islands closer to China are more Chinese allies. So very interesting. I could definitely see this. I think this is very likely to happen. If not this exact scenario, something very similar to this. But hey, video is over. We are about 7 viewers, so thank you all so much for watching. Let's keep going. And what other video can we watch? Should we watch which country is the most unequal?